The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Thank you, Nighthawk, and welcome back to Dave and Mac the Shiny Sound Show number 544, Foul 48 500. We're talking about false flags, and we took you through a whole bunch of examples over the last few weeks. We talked about Little Green Men in the Crimea, we talked about 9/11, we talked about the Gulf of Tonkin incident, September 11, of course, is a big one, the Reichstagsbrand, and a whole bunch of others. And look, it's a Operation Northwoods, probably one of the more famous ones as well. It's a tried and true strategy of the powers that be to have an operation that they couldn't have, themselves, and blame it on someone else to achieve a certain political end. That's what happens in the world, right? It's just how they operate. It makes sense.
It's a tool in their toolbox.
It is. 100%. Just like war is the last resort of diplomacy, false flagging is the last tool in the political persuasion game. So if you want something done, but your population isn't coming along, if you something example, the Americans, the American public, I should say, really did not want to become embroiled in World War II. Right? They wanted to hold fast with Wilson and Monroe. Presidents Wilson and Monroe saying, well, we're not really interested in all those European issues. That's a European problem, not our problem. Whereas the industrial military complex, the power brokers, moneymen, and industrialists, of course, they were very much interested in becoming involved because that's where the money is. So how do you get the American public to agree? And we shared this with you. Pearl Harbor was, if not engineered, certainly an event that was allowed to happen, while not traditionally a false flag operation. I mean, these were actually Japanese attacking the Americans, right? Not Americans dressed up as Japanese. It falls in the same category simply because it was allowed to happen. Mm-hmm. Because it could have been cut off. They could have been headed off. Let's head them off at the pass. Yay, yippee-ki-yay. But they didn't. They didn't stop it. They let it happen. In fact, they moved all the valuable naval gear away from Pearl Harbor and left some dilapidated. So I mean, it didn't help the people that were killed in the attack, obviously, right? And that was real enough. These people were killed.
That just helps you
in the attack. Yeah, but that's okay. You see, it is okay for the power brokers to have these people die because they're serving a greater purpose, which is to make them ever richer. That's really
it's no different than just sending endless streams of teenagers with guns over a hill to try and grab the hill. It's all for a cause, and no one complains about that.
Correct. And look, so it is. But look, a false flag operation or an operation which allows the enemy to succeed, at least seemingly so, in order to create a certain political environment and a certain political decision. We all put them in the same category here, okay? Because ultimately they are the same. Now, the question is, why does it matter? Why does it matter? And there's this beautiful piece we found here. We want to share with you.
This is great.
As to why it matters, right? And this is really interesting. Former prominent Republican U.S. Congressman and CIA official Bob Barr stated that the U.S. is close to becoming a totalitarian society, and that elements in government are using fear to try to bring this about. Now, Dave and I have spoken about fear at large, and we've spoken about fear a lot. And we've also spoken about uncertainty. So for Dave and myself, the two pillars of control that we're experiencing today are fear and uncertainty. Fear is good, uncertainty, in my opinion, even better. Now, Republican U.S. Congressman Ron Paul, remember him, stated that the government is determined to have martial law. We almost had it as well. He also said a contrived Gulf of Tonkin type incident may occur to gain popular support for an attack on Iran. Former National Security Advisor Brzezinski told the Senate that a terrorist act might be carried out in the US and falsely be blamed on Iran to justify yet another war. The former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury in the Reagan administration, Paul Craig Roberts, who is called the father of Reaganomics or Reagan economics, Reaganomics, and is a former editor and columnist for the Wall Street Journal, Businessweek, and Scripps Howard News Service, said the following, and I'm quoting: "Ask yourself, would a government that has lied us into 2 wars and is working to lie us into an attack on Iran shrink from staging terrorist attacks in order to remove opposition to its agenda?" End quote. Retired 27-year CIA analyst Ray McGovern, who prepared and presented presidential daily briefs and served as a high-level analyst for several presidents, stated that if there was another major attack in the US, it would lead to martial law. He went on to say this, and I'm quoting: "We have to be careful. If somebody does this kind of provocation, big violent explosions of some kind, we have to not take the word of the masters there in Washington that this was some terrorist event." Let me say this again. We have to not take the word of the masters there in Washington that this was some terrorist event, because it could well be a provocation allowing them, or seemingly to allow them, to get what they want. To get what they want. End quote. The former CIA analyst would not put it past the government to play fast and loose with terror alerts and warnings and even terrorist events in order to rally people behind the flag. General Tommy Franks stated that if another terrorist attack occurs in the United States, I'm quoting, "the Constitution will likely be discarded in favor of a military form of government," end quote. Former UN Weapons Inspector Scott Ritter stated before the Iraq War that there were no weapons of mass destruction. He is now saying that he would not rule out staged government terror by the US government. And British Parliament member George Galloway stated that, and this is a quote, "There's a very real danger that the American government will stage a false flag terror attack in order to justify war against Iran and to gain complete control domestically." The abundance, this is important, everybody, it's been 20 years. The abundance of reliable information, right, in various sources and from various sources suggests that not only has the US in the past conducted false flag operations, but there is a possibility that 9/11 involved some elements of this deceit, and a future false flag operation cannot be ruled out. We must spread this news to all who care to listen, that we might build the critical mass necessary to stop these secret operations and work together for a more caring civil society. Now, before I hand it over to my colleague who's going to share an awesome article to us, let's be very clear here. I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think Donald Trump is part of that political establishment.
Mm-hmm.
He's part of a different establishment, you know, and he's no more savory than other people, but he is not part of this establishment which would use false flag attacks, in my opinion. And I think that was probably the biggest problem that the establishment had with him. He just wouldn't play ball. He is not one of the boys. He's a boy, different boys club though, to be clear. But he's not part of the boys in Washington. And you know, you can't have a president like that in the White House. You know, like Kennedy or even Washington. Sorry, Lincoln, I should say, not Washington. People that might expose the agenda or work against the agenda. You look at Eisenhower definitely was not part of this cabal, and he warned us about it too.
Yeah.
But he was way too prominent and way too much of a war hero to ever be taken out by force. He was in many Americans, he was what won World War II. Not entirely accurate, but nonetheless, there we are. But the warnings were always there. And before Trump, I can't think of a single player that was not part of the establishment since Kennedy. So it was Kennedy, and then maybe Carter, Jimmy Carter, but he was ignominiously removed from power as well. If you remember the Iran, the taking of the Tehran embassy.
Yeah,
that was quite something. So he lost the election, right? So Jimmy Carter was not part of the establishment, but everybody else that has held power since then, I want to say, was firmly part of the establishment, Dave.
Yeah, completely agreed. Look, there's next, and I'm not going to comment any further. I think we've covered that off. There's an opinion piece here by David K. Shipler, and he published this April 28, 2012. And this was close to our first show, Mackie.
Yes, it was.
Terrorist plots hatched by the FBI. The United States has been narrowly saved from lethal terrorist plots in recent years, or so it has seemed. A would-be suicide bomber was intercepted on his way to the Capitol. A scheme to bomb synagogues and shoot Stinger missiles at military aircraft was developed by men in Newburgh, New Jersey. And a fanciful idea to fly explosive-laden model planes into the Pentagon and the Capitol was hatched in Massachusetts. Americans have great town names. I was going to say that. But all of these dramas were facilitated by the FBI, whose undercover agents and informers posed as terrorists offering a dummy missile, fake C4 explosives, a disarmed suicide vest, and rudimentary training. Suspects naively played their part until they were arrested. When an Oregon College student, Mohammed Osman Mohammed, thought of using a car bomb to attack a festive Christmas tree lighting ceremony in Portland, the FBI provided a van loaded with 6 55-gallon drums of inert material, harmless blasting caps, a detonator cord, and a gallon of diesel fuel to make the van smell flammable. An undercover FBI agent even did the driving with Mr. Mohammed in the passenger seat. To trigger the bomb, the student punched a number into a cell phone and got no boom, only a bust. This is legal, but is it legitimate? Without the FBI, would the culprits commit violence on their own? It's a good question to ask. Is cultivating potential terrorists the best use of the manpower designed to find the real ones? Judging by their official answers, the FBI and the Justice Department are sure of themselves. Too sure, perhaps, says the author of the article. Carefully orchestrated sting operations usually hold up in court. Defendants invariably claim entrapment and almost always lose, because the law requires that they show no predisposition to commit the crime, even when induced by government agents. To underscore their predisposition, many suspects are warned about the seriousness of their plots and given opportunities to back out, said Dean Boyd, a Justice Department spokesman. But not always. Recorded conversations show sometimes they are coaxed to continue. Oh, go on!
Go on then!
Right. I've just made that isn't what the text says. I was just being funny. Undercover operations, long practiced by the FBI, have become a mainstay of counterterrorism. and they have changed in response to the post 9/11 focus on prevention. Prior to 9/11, it would be very unusual for the FBI to present a crime opportunity that wasn't in the scope of the activities that a person was already involved in, said Mike German of the American Civil Liberties Union, a lawyer and former FBI agent who infiltrated white supremacist groups. An alleged drug dealer would be set up to sell drugs to an undercover agent, arms trafficker to sell weapons. That still happens routinely, but less so is counterterrorism, and for good reason. There isn't a business of terrorism in the United States, thank God, a former federal prosecutor, David Raskin, explained. He goes on to say, you're not going to be able to go to a street corner and find somebody who's already blowing something up, he said. Therefore, the usual goal is not to find somebody who's already engaged in terrorism, but find somebody who would jump at the opportunity if a real terrorist showed up in town. And that's the grey area. Who is susceptible? Anyone who plays along with the agents, apparently. Once the snare is set, law enforcement sees no choice. Ignoring such threats is not an option, Mr. Boyd argued, given the possibility that the suspects could act alone at any time or find someone else willing to help them. Typically, the stings initially target suspects for pure speech, comments to an informer outside of a mosque, maybe angry postings on websites, emails with radicals overseas, then woo them into relationships with informers who are often convicted felons working in exchange for leniency, or with FBI agents posing as members of Al-Qaeda or other groups. Some targets have previous involvement in more than idle talk. For example, Wad Ramadan Alwan, an Iraqi in Kentucky, whose fingerprints were found on an unexploded roadside bomb near Baiji, Iraq, and Raja Khan of Chicago, who sent funds to Al-Qaeda leader in Pakistan. But how long is that? It just keeps going. Mekki, you take the rest.
Oh, of course. But others seem ambivalent, incompetent, and adrift like hapless wannabes looking for a cause that the informer or undercover agent skillfully helps them find. Take the Stinger missile defendant James Cromitie, a low-level drug dealer with a criminal record that included no violence or hate crime, despite his rants against Jews. He was searching for answers within his Islamic faith, said his lawyer, Clinton W. Calhoun III. What a name. Who has appealed his conviction. And this informant, I think, twisted that search in a really pretty awful way, sort of misdirected Cromitie in his search and turned him towards violence. The informer, Shahed Hussein, had been charged with fraud, but avoided prison and deportation by working undercover in another investigation. He was being paid by the FBI to pose as a wealthy Pakistani with ties to Jaish-e-Mohammed, a terrorist group that Mr. Cromitie apparently had never heard of before they met by chance in the parking lot of a mosque. Brother, did you ever try to do anything for the cause of Islam? Mr. Hussein asked at one point. Okay, brother, Mr. Cromitie replied warily. Where are you going with this, brother? 2 days later, the informer told him, Allah has more work for you to do, and added, revelation is going to come in your dreams that you have to do this thing, okay? About 15 minutes later, Mr. Hussein proposed the idea of using missiles, saying he could get them in a container from China. Mr. Cromitie laughed. Reading hundreds of pages of transcripts of the recorded conversations is like looking at the ink blots of a Rorschach test. Patterns of willingness and hesitation overlap and merge. I don't want anyone to get hurt, Mr. Cromarty said, and then explained that he meant women and children. I don't care if it's a whole synagogue full of men. It took 11 months of meandering discussion and a promise of $250,000 to lead him with 3 co-conspirators he recruited to plant fake bombs at 2 Riverdale synagogues. Only the government could have made a terrorist out of Mr. Cromarty, whose buffoonery is positively Shakespearean in its scope, said Judge Colleen McMahon, sentencing him to 25 years. She branded it a fantasy terror operation, but called his attempt beyond despicable and rejected his claim of entrapment. The judge's statement was unusual, but Mr. Cromarty's characteristics were not. His incompetence and ambivalence could be found among other aspiring terrorists, whose grandiose plans were nurtured by law enforcement. They included men who wanted to attack fuel lines at Kennedy International Airport, destroy the Sears Tower, now the Willis Tower, in Chicago, carry out a suicide bombing near Tampa Bay in Florida, and bomb subways in New York and Washington. Of the 22 most frightening plans for attacks since 9/11 on American soil, 14, that's 2/3, were developed in sting operations. 14. Another New York subway plot, which recently went to trial, needed no help from government, nor did a bombing attempt in Times Square, the abortive underwear bombing in a jetliner over Detroit, a planned attack on Fort Dix, New Jersey, and several smaller efforts. Some threats are real, others less so. In terrorism, it's not easy to tell the difference. Look, before we go on to the next thing, Dave, it's really quite something, because the thing is these are people. They might mouth off and hate the Jews and hate Muslims and they hate someone, right? Someone's going to get hated here. But it's the government, the FBI, or maybe the CIA, or maybe some other agency that comes along and says, you really should do something about that. And in this case, Mr. Cromarty's case, he got 25 years, right? It took almost a year to convince him that he should act, and he was given $250,000 to top it off. Now, I mean, if you took anybody, any person off the street, right, and you spent a year haranguing them and trying to turn them and
grooming them into grooming
them, yeah, and then offer them, buckets of money. So I don't know. So clearly, $250,000 is a lot of money, I imagine, to Mr. Cromarty, but offer an equivalent amount of money, with the same kind of impact to anyone else, and I will find that more often than not, you will be successful in turning them into the terrorists that you wanted. So this is not about detecting terrorism or finding and destroying terrorist cells. This is actually creating terrorists. We see that this is funny because it reminds me of 1984 in so many ways. We will create these scenarios where people will become the criminals we tell them, or we think they are. So it's like, yes, you are the person we think is going to be a terrorist, so we're going to turn you into a terrorist. Chances are that Mr. Cromarty and maybe many others like him would never have gone down that path. I mean, are they anti-Semitic? Are they, racist? Sure they are. It's no reason to send them to jail. I mean, they're unpleasant people, right? But they didn't really want to commit any violent crimes. Not really. I mean, if somebody was offered to act, it wouldn't take a year and money to convince them to do it, right? But that's exactly what happened here. How do we reconcile that with the idea that you're innocent until proven guilty, because you're being forced into a crime?
If you kept all the communication logs, maybe you could prove it.
Yeah, but in this case,
I really had no intention up until I made contact with the person to do anything.
Yeah.
Every 5 minutes they're asking me, when am I going to do it? And I go, do what? And they go, the thing you're going to do. What's that? Oh, just we'll see.
Yeah. It is.
How
It is.
much
It is
do
a
you
start.
hate those people? I don't know really.
A lot.
I hit like on Facebook on something 10 years ago. What are you talking about?
Yeah, but it is really. I mean, we're creating. So is this a false flag? Yes, yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is, because it is not actually. This is not Al Qaeda reaching out, or the Taliban,
That's
or,
right.
or whatever, or the Shining Path, or whoever, right? This is the government taking people that have some romantic notions about freedom and killing people in the name of some greater good, and turning them into terrorists. So none of these people actually have any contact to the actual terrorist organizations that we call them anyway, that we're trying to destroy. We're creating, 22 plans, and 14 were developed in sting operations. 2/3, fully 2/3. I'm not okay. There's still 8 there that were real. So let's focus on those. Let's not invent another 14 on top of that. What if it goes sideways? Well, let's say, for argument's sake, let's say it goes really sideways, and let's say that rather than fake bombs, by some not miracle, but by some really unfortunate circumstance, these bombs turn out to be real. Like recently, one of the Baldwin brothers shot a couple of people on set and killed one, and that was meant to be a fake gun. Now, right? It was an accident, clearly, or so it seems, but that happened. So this is worse. Okay, so you got a couple of fake bombs, but what if they turn out to be real because of whatever? Maybe one of the guys that, the 3 conspirators that were also hired here, they know about bombs. They go, oh, well, this bomb is not real. Let's fix it.
Let's fix it, yeah.
Let's fix
real
it. Oh, sorry,
someone, real caps, yeah.
Yeah. So someone, and they go, oh, and then you go, good job on us. We fixed it, Bob. And then the FBI goes, what do you mean you fixed? What do you mean fixed it? No, it was a fake bomb, but we fixed it. Oh,
yeah, that's right. Oh no.
Well, who?
Code Blue. Code Blue.
Yeah, but I didn't see anywhere in this article that any of the agents, FBI or otherwise, were held accountable.
No, that's right.
For any of it. What if people had been killed as part of this attack?
So when you say you fixed it, or you had your friends fix it, and then he runs off to never be seen again, yelling into his lapel that Code Blue.
Yeah, Code Blue. Code Blue. You're the last one.
So
it is completely.
That's pretty crazy.
But it's unconscionable. It is so irresponsible. It's not even. It's like giving drugs and alcohol to minors. That's what it's like, and then arresting them for drinking it.
That's right.
It's I'm flabbergasted that this is actually something that is clearly standard procedure. But look, Dave, why don't you tell us about a more recent article?
Yeah, so published in February 25th this year by Scott Radnitz, an associate professor of international studies at the University of Washington. And this is, what are false flag attacks? And did Russia stage any to claim justification for invading Ukraine? Now, there's a disclosure statement here. It says, Scott Radnitz does not work for, consult, own shares in, or received money or any funding from any company or organization that would benefit from this article, and has disclosed no relevant affiliations beyond their academic appointment. Now that's out of the way. The Russian assault on Ukraine, which began in the early hours of February 24th, 2022, was launched after weeks of Russian disinformation that included false claims about Ukrainian terrorist attacks, assaults on civilians, and military aggression against the self-proclaimed breakaway republics in eastern Ukraine. Observers have been on the lookout for a Russian false flag attack, a highly visible event that Russia could use as justification for taking military action. False flag attacks are attacks by a government on its own forces to create the appearance of hostile action by an opponent, allowing the government to broadcast images to the world of its opponent's supposed actions. The Kremlin and pro-government propagandists, that's the other one, on television and social media have put out a variety of claims accusing Ukraine of carrying out bombings, blaming Ukraine for non-existent attacks, and warnings of nefarious future Ukrainian and Western plots, including false flag operations against the enemy, is plotting against you, false flag attacks. The claims include a car bombing and an alleged attempt by Ukrainian saboteurs to blow up a chemical storage facility, both in separatists' eastern Ukraine. The messaging is meant to create an impression of a Ukrainian onslaught and impending humanitarian crisis. If Russia attempted actual false flag attacks, they were one element of a larger campaign to build a narrative about Ukrainian provocations, there we go, unwarranted actions that require a defensive and retaliatory response. Putin invoked this logic in his memorable speech that delivered his justifications for an invasion. Yet, even in that speech, which was laden with dubious historical claims, pent-up grievances, and false accusations about the Ukrainian government, the recent upsurge in fighting in the Donbass region registered almost as an afterthought. This is in contrast to Russia's invasion of the 2008 war with Georgia, which the Kremlin justified in terms of protecting its citizens from Georgian attacks. Given the lack of pretense of a plausible rationale, it is hard to avoid the conclusion that the Kremlin is unconcerned about how the world views its invasion. Let's call it a special military operation.
That's exactly what it is. And the funny thing is this, right? We are now half a year into it, really, right? And we're seeing, and this is a funny thing. I mean, this article was written, what was it, the beginning of the year, right?
The 24th of February.
Well, let's say it's 6 months ago.
Actually, it was the 25th, the day after.
Yeah, correct. Now, it is interesting to just look at the situation now, where the Ukrainians are talking about retaking the Donbass and Crimea. In fact, we can't have a peace negotiation until we get the Crimea back, which was annexed in 2014. Remember, I asked earlier in the piece, probably just as the conflict started, Dave, what would we do, or how would we feel if the Ukraine started attacking Russia now and capturing Russian territory? Would we feel
the same?
Well, yeah, would we help the Ukrainians in the same way that we do now, right? And look, the answer to that question is still outstanding because they haven't actually made any inroads into Russian territory. They are taking back territory, though, that was taken from them, and the Russians are taking a beating. I'm blown away.
Fluffy duck, right? That didn't weigh anything. I mean, it's all puff and no blow. Is that I don't know what it is. There's some expression. All puff and no steam. I don't know what it is. They, as Russia, had a plan for 3 days to topple the government.
Yes.
3 days. It's been leaked.
It didn't really happen.
No. So, is it just because they've had very little real military practice?
Well, I mean,
is it
Russian
because
troops
they're falsely inflated? Their machines are rubbish, and outdated. I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Honestly, it's a combination of a whole bunch of factors. I mean, and most of the Russian soldiers are in fact conscripts, and you know that conscripts never fight as hard as someone that's fighting for their homeland. I mean, that's a truism that's been as old as war.
That's true. Yeah, the home game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you fight a lot harder if you're defending your homeland, your family, your people, right? Yep. And that's the disadvantage that the Russians have with this particular adventure here. So yeah, but I'm amazed that they are as ineffective as they are. I really am. I truly truly, I'm well beyond words, and I don't know what will happen in the future, because now Russia has been shown to be, well, as weak as we could only,
had hoped.
We could hope. Yeah, we couldn't even imagine that they're this weak.
All bluster. Or this inept. That's it. Without the nuclear weapons, they're just kids. So
I completely agree.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for the nuclear weapons, everybody would have stepped in a long time ago.
That's right.
I mean, let's be very clear. That's absolutely what would have happened. But because they have nuclear weapons, everybody's treading softly. Anyway, look, the article goes on about the long history of false flag attacks. Both, and we've covered this, but I want to just quickly go through some of these as well, just as a quick reminder because this will be the last show on the cycle. Both false flag attacks and allegations that states engage in them have a long history. The term originated to describe pirates wielding of friendly and false flags to lure merchant ships close enough to attack. It was later used as a label for any attack, real or simulated, that the instigators inflict against friendly forces to incriminate an adversary and create the basis for retaliation. In the 20th century, there were several prominent episodes involving false flag operations. In 1939, agents from Nazi Germany broadcast anti-German messages from a German radio station near the Polish border. They also murdered several civilians, whom they dressed in Polish military uniforms to create a pretext for Germany's planned invasion of Poland. That same year, the Soviet Union detonated shells in Soviet territory near the Finnish border and blamed Finland, which it then proceeded to invade. The US has also been implicated in similar plots. Operation Northwoods was a proposal to kill Americans and blame the attack on Castro, thereby granting the military the pretext to invade Cuba. The Kennedy administration ultimately rejected the plan. In addition to these actual plots, there have been numerous alleged false flag attacks involving the US government. Alleged. The sinking of the USS Maine in 1898 and the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964, each of which was a critical part of a casus belli, have been claimed as possible false flag attacks, though the evidence supporting these allegations, in this author's opinion, is weak.
Global visibility, disinformation, and cynicism. That's where we are, isn't it?
We are pretty much.
It is good. Yay. More recent and even less fact-based is the 9/11 Truth Movement, which alleged that the Bush administration engineered the destruction of the Twin Towers to justify restrictions on civil liberties and lay the foundation for invading Iraq. Right-wing pundits and politicians have promoted the conspiracy theory that Democrats have staged mass shootings, such as the one at the high school in Parkland, Florida, in 2018, in order to push for gun control laws. I'm not saying this is what the article says. If people believe that false flag operations happen, it is not because they are common. Instead, they gain plausibility from the widespread perception that politicians are unscrupulous and take advantage of crises. Yes, never waste a good crisis.
Right.
Or never waste a good opportunity. Right? They see those as one and the same. Furthermore, governments operate in relative secrecy and have recourse to tools of coercion such as intelligence, well-trained agents, and weapons to implement their agenda. It is not a huge leap to imagine that leaders deliberately cause the high-impact events that they later exploit for political gain, notwithstanding the logistical complexities, large number of people who would have to be involved, and moral qualms leaders might have about murdering their own citizens.
Okay, let's just pause there for a second and dissect this a little bit, because this is where the author of the article and I part ways. Number one, logistical complexities. Not really. It also says large number of people would have to be involved. And that would, of course, indicate that you can't keep it secret. So let's be very clear here. Military organizations and secret service organizations are very, very, very good at keeping secrets. I want to give you a simple example. It's one of my favorite examples recently of other things, but this one in particular. The Skinwalker Ranch was under the ownership of Ed Bigelow for some 20 years, give or take. In that 20 years, he had hosts of scientists and military personnel on the ranch to investigate the extraordinary phenomena that manifest at that place, right? Very few things have come out of that. We don't know a lot of what went on. Some things we do, but most things we don't. Now, the question is then, well, why is that? Because nobody talked. There was, what they did now for the most recent investigations, they invited one is a colonel, and secondly, a soldier who had been part of the investigation as part of security on the ranch under Bigelow, to the new investigation. And he said, this is what the soldier said, ever since the Tic-Tac disclosure, yes. He feels he can now talk about this. Before that, he said, I never talked about what I saw on the ranch.
Yeah.
This is a person, a military person, no longer in the military, right? But he had sworn an oath of secrecy.
Yep.
And he upheld it until the Tic-Tac video came out.
Yes.
Okay. And so, but my point is this. This is what people do, especially military types. They stick to their oaths. They stick to their secrecy simply because that's what they've been trained to do. Okay. And he didn't. And plus, he was also a military contractor still, right? Not working for the military, but being doing contract security work. And he didn't want to wreck his chances of employment either. So there are many levers and many buttons to push, but for the most part, I believe very strongly that, especially in the military or the secret services, if there's a secret that people want kept, they will keep it. Because if you do not toe the line, right, there are pressure points that could be applied. Your life could be threatened. Your livelihood could be threatened. Your credibility could be destroyed. Which has happened with some.
Assassination is big, and the other one is just threatening that you'll just go into the desert and disappear. Yeah, just be seen.
Disappear.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, let's look at Mr. Assange for a second, just because this is important. Because everybody, see, this is the argument we always hear, Dave and I. We always hear, if there really was a secret, we would all know about it. So let's be very, very clear. You all know about it. We all talk about it. This show has been talking about it for 12 years.
That's right.
We have been talking about this for 12 years, right? And we've talked to people that have been in places. We've seen things ourselves, but nobody listens.
That's right.
Because the sources, right, have been discredited. And all of you out there, well, maybe not the listenership of this particular show, but most people out there will say, what nonsense.
That's right.
Common sense indicates that this can't be so. This is not true. Because, why would the politicians lie to us? And if it was true, then everybody would know about it. Well, no. If you destroy the credibility of the sources, and let's come back to Assange here, right? Look at the guy. I mean, first of all, he didn't get any of the information himself from the government. It was given to him.
Yeah.
Right. So he just published it. But my point is, he was discredited, and in fact, he was charged with rape. And that's why he's in jail now, awaiting trial and awaiting extradition, etc., etc. Now, they went a long way to destroy him in any way possible. He spent years inside an embassy, never setting foot out the door. Mm-hmm. So let's be really crystal clear with Snowden? This. Same. Let's be crystal clear. If they, the ominous them, right, which is the establishment, the parasitic elite, that's the term. If they want to destroy you, they will. If they want to, wreck your credibility, they will. Watch the movie. What was it called? With Will Smith. It's Enemy of the State.
Mm-hmm.
It's an older movie now. Will Smith plays a lawyer who inadvertently comes into possession of a tape that shows the murder of a senator or congressman. I can't remember. He doesn't even know he has it. But they go to work on him, right, in the movie, and they destroy his credibility. Mm-hmm. They slander him. They dig up an affair he used to have. Even his own family comes to doubt him. Right now, in true Hollywood fashion, it's resolved, and there's really only this one culprit, that clearly, overstepped his mark inside the Pentagon, rather than blaming the entire institution, and the shadow government. But it's a real thing. They will do all of these things to you, right? So no, I'm sorry, I don't accept the argument that a lot of people would have to know about this as an argument against the secret being real. I think that's nonsense. Now, another thing, moral qualms about leaders, that leaders might have about murdering their own citizens. I've said this before and I say it again, and I will say it as long as I live. These people, either the ones that were born into power or the people that worked all their life to get into power, look at us very differently from the way we look at ourselves. Mm-hmm. So I look at Dave, I see a friend, I see a colleague, I see a man I've spent some time with, we shared meals, he's a good guy. If I can help it at all, I will make sure that, I can help him where I can, and I would never do him any active harm. So that's how I see Dave. The way that Dave is seen by a political leader, a president, a prime minister, is just an expendable citizen, potentially, right? As someone, if they're in the wrong place at the wrong time, could be used to advance someone's political agenda. It is that simple.
We're getting to a fascist state where it's going to be comply, voter.
Yeah. And make no mistake, because the leaders of the world, like these nation leaders, whatever, even corporate leaders, they have to make decisions that put people in harm's way.
Yeah.
And they make them every day. Mm-hmm. They also make decisions that might destroy your livelihood. Maybe they will make you redundant. Maybe they'll fire you. Right? In some countries, you get fired without any compensation. You just fired. That's it. You're fired. Goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
By the thousands, by the tens of thousands.
Yeah.
They're sending people to die in wars by the millions.
Mm-hmm.
By the millions. 75,000 Russian soldiers, the latest count, I don't know if it's still accurate, but 75,000 Russian soldiers have been killed by a conflict that, in my mind, is completely Putin. It's Putin's war. It's not a Russian war.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? It's not an oligarch's war. It's Putin's war. And he sent 75,000 of his citizens to die. Mm-hmm. Never mind the people on the other side that were killed, which are not really his concern. Fair enough, whatever, right? But these are 75,000 of his own people. The Americans sent tens of thousands of people to die in Iran. Sorry, not yet. Iran. Oh, too much?
Too soon?
Have I given too much away? They sent tens of thousands of people to die in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Vietnam, in Korea, right? The last war, in my mind, that could be classified as a just war. And a just war is a war in political sciences terms that is a war that has moral justification to be waged.
Mm-hmm.
That was World War II, in my opinion, simply because of the Nazi machine, right? I mean, is everybody lily white clean on the other side? No, of course not. Of course not. But you can make a very strong argument that the defeat of Nazi Germany was a just end in itself. Okay, you could make that argument, especially with what we discovered in the concentration camps. But that was the last one. That we can't claim any such moral high ground for anything since then. None of the conflicts. There was no link between Afghanistan and 9/11. None, except for the link they said they had. There was no link between Iraq and 9/11, except for the now false information we know was presented at the UN. Are we really that naive that we don't think that these leaders are not going to put people in harm's way? That's just look. Let's finish this off because we have about a few minutes. Why don't you take us through the challenge of credibility, Dave?
The willingness to believe that leaders are capable of such atrocities reflects a broader trend of rising distrust towards governments worldwide, which accidentally complicates matters for leaders who intend to carry out future false flag attacks. If the impact of such attacks has historically come from their ability to rally citizens around their leader, false flag attacks staged today may not only fail to provoke outrage against the purported aggressor, but they can also backfire by casting suspicion on the leaders who stand to benefit. Furthermore, investigators using open source intelligence such as Bellingcat Collective of citizen internet sleuths make it more difficult for governments to get away with egregious violations of laws and international norms. Even as the Biden administration attempts to blunt Russia's ability to seize the initiative, it too faces credibility challenges. Reporters were justifiably skeptical of the State Department spokesman Ned Price's warning about Russia's false flag plans, especially since he did not provide evidence for the claim. I watched that live. That was great. So when is this going to happen? Well, I've already said what's going to happen. Well, you just said that there's a possibility of false flags. But can you give me anything more? You really need to tell us more. You can't just write that. And then he just repeated the thing. Well, that's what I've said. Without saying anything. Skeptics pointed to the August 2021 drone striking during the US withdrawal from Kabul, which the military initially asserted was a righteous strike to kill a suicide bomber, but that later turned out to be a mistaken attack on an innocent man and his family, and it took overwhelming and undeniable evidence from media investigations before the US government admitted the mistake. That was the car in the Over the Horizon strike. Insofar as the Kremlin might expect to benefit from executing a false flag attack, it would be to manufacture a casus belli among
a reason for war.
Yeah, Russian citizens rather than to persuade audiences abroad. Surveys have shown that the vast majority of Russians are opposed to invading Ukraine, yet they also harbor negative attitudes towards NATO. The spectacle of provocation aimed at Russia on state-run television might provide a jolt of support for an invasion, at least initially. At the same time, Russians are cynical about their own leaders and might harbor the suspicion that the purported attack was manufactured for political gain.
Yeah. In any event, Russia had other options to facilitate the invasion. At the start of its incursion into Crimea in 2014, the Kremlin used active measures, including disinformation and deception, to prevent Ukrainian resistance and secure domestic approval. Russia and other post-Soviet states are also prone to claim a provocation which frames any military action as a justified response rather than a first move. By contrast, false flag operations are complex and perhaps overly theatrical in a way that invites unwanted scrutiny. Governments seeking to sway public opinion face far greater challenges today than they did in the 20th century. False flag attacks are risky, while leaders seeking to manufacture a casus belli can select from a range of subtler and less costly alternatives. Agreed, I still believe that false flag attacks as a reason for war or going to war are extremely useful.
Do you know what, Mackie? The thing that on September 11th, the thing that got me was just how quickly they identified the perpetrator, despite
hours.
Despite the perpetrator not claiming the success. Yeah,
I know.
And
there was
what?
Yeah.
How are you already apportioning blame to Osama bin Laden at this point?
Yeah, look,
the events are already taking place. They haven't finished.
Yeah,
right. That's great. Yeah,
it's nuts.
Good
it's
for
crazy.
you. Like, hey, those researchers are awesome. And that was the early days of the internet, Mackie.
I know, right? No, I think it is time, because it has been over 20 years now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're coming to the anniversary in a short couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is now incumbent upon us to once again cast an eye back 20 years to that event. So I think the next show cycle we're going to perpetrate upon our listening audience is going to be that.
Mm-hmm.
Just a reminder of what actually went down on that day, because people, that are alive today and voting that weren't alive then.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you know what I
mean?
So it has been over 20 years since this happened, and the investigations. I want to look at a whole bunch of investigations, especially the engineers and such, the citizens, to understand, because the 9/11 Commission report, that was ridiculous. That was just
it was a whitewash.
It didn't look at anything, right?
No, I know. Look, we'll talk about that. But so look, in false flags, I can't imagine what could be around the corner. I really can't.
Look, the key thing to understand is, and by the way, nobody, I completely agree with you in the chat room.
Yeah.
I think you're 100% on the money. The thing is this. Taiwan produces about 80 to 90% of the world's microchips. It just does. And if something were to happen to that production capacity, remember there was an earthquake, I think it was some natural catastrophe, which really caused a memory chip problem in the world. If that capacity to produce was taken away, the economy, the world economy, would grind to a halt. There's virtually nothing
for a long time.
Yeah, but even the existing tech couldn't be produced because there's literally nothing anymore.
No new devices without current tech.
Yeah,
it would all be cut off.
So anything you have from microwaves to telephones to cars, cookware,
networking.
It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah,
everything has a chip. Everything has a chip.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it would grind to a halt.
I would imagine that Taiwan would blow the factories.
Yes.
Rather than hand them over. Yeah. Scorched earth, man.
Yeah.
Oh, look, there's the music.
There it is, my friend.
This has been 2 hours of Shiny Side Out with Dave and Mickey. You can catch us on Tuesday night and Thursday night as well. Or Tuesday and Thursday morning, depending on where you are in the universe. And coming up next is Jer Bear with his awesome show, After Hours. Stay tuned for that awesome music. Wake up with a lovely Sunday. Take care, everyone. See you next time.